She slapped her husband and his mistress in court, then married her lawyer. Now the husband regrets everything. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Today, my heart could burst. We've reached 20,000 followers, and I want to scream it with love. I am nothing without you. This isn't my milestone, it's ours. You made this happen. Your love, your loyalty, your belief in me. No one in this world loves you more than I do. If you're hearing my voice, please like this video and comment, I'm here. I need to feel your presence now more than ever. You are my joy, my blessing, my strength. I don't just love you, I cherish you. I thank God for you. You are more than family. You are my everything. Now please receive this prayer, soaked in all the love I hold for you. May the sun rise just to see you smile. May your tears turn to laughter, your worries to calm. May your home overflow with peace, your hands hold abundance, and your heart never feel alone. May every breath remind you you are deeply seen, divinely protected, and endlessly loved. I love you more than words, more than time, more than the world itself. Let's begin, with fire in our hearts and a family bond that nothing can break. The marble floors of the courthouse echoed with the sharp click of Elise Wood's stilettos as she walked through the corridors, her head held high despite the storm raging in her heart. At 28, she was a vision of elegance and strength, her dark skin glowing with an inner fire, her curves perfectly accentuated by a tailored black dress that spoke of both mourning and power. Her natural hair was styled in a sleek bun that emphasized the graceful line of her neck, and her amber eyes blazed with a mixture of pain and determination. 3 weeks ago, her world had imploded when she discovered Derek entangled with his secretary Jessica, a calculating blonde barely out of college. The devastating scene replayed endlessly in her mind. Derek's hands exploring another woman's curves, his mouth murmuring the same passionate words he'd once reserved for her during 5 years of what she'd believed was a loving marriage. The betrayal had cut deeper than any physical wound. She'd given Derek everything, her love, her trust, her body, her dreams of the future. She'd supported his struggling business, encouraged his ambitions, and stood by him through every failure and disappointment. And this was how he repaid her devotion. But today was about justice. Today was about reclaiming her dignity. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and legal professionals who'd heard about the high-profile divorce case. Derek sat at the defendant's table with his cheap attorney, his once handsome face now looking haggard and desperate. The man who had once made her heart race with excitement now filled her with nothing but disgust. Beside him, like a pathetic shadow, sat Jessica, her bleached hair and too tight dress making her look every bit the homewrecker she was. Elise took her seat next to her attorney, Andrew Shadrick, and felt a flutter of something unexpected in her chest. At 35, Andrew was breathtakingly handsome in a way that made her forget, momentarily, why she was there. His steel-grey eyes held intelligence and something darker, a hunger that made her skin tingle when he looked at her. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the powerful build underneath. He was everything Derek wasn't, strong, confident and devastatingly masculine. When Andrew had accepted her case, she'd been impressed by his formidable reputation, the city's most ruthless divorce attorney, a man who crushed opposing counsel and never showed mercy to unfaithful spouses. But she hadn't anticipated how her body would respond to his commanding presence, how her pulse would accelerate when he spoke her name with that distinctive gravelly tone, or how his fierce protectiveness would awaken feelings Derek had never. Inspired? "Are you ready for this?" Andrew asked, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. His hand briefly touched hers on the table, and the contact was electric. Even through the simple touch, she could feel his strength, his unwavering support. "I've been ready since the moment I caught them," Elise replied, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. The memory of that night still haunted her, walking into her own bedroom to find her husband buried between another woman's thighs, their moans of pleasure turning to shocked gasps when they saw her standing in the doorway. The proceedings began with Derek's attorney painting him as a remorseful husband who'd made a mistake. Elise watched with growing disgust as Derek actually managed to summon tears, playing the victim card with practiced ease. He claimed the affair meant nothing, that he loved only Elise, that he was willing to do anything to save their marriage. The lies rolled off his tongue so smoothly that she wondered how many times he'd practiced this performance. "Your Honor," Derek said, his voice breaking with fake emotion, "I know I made a terrible mistake, but Elise is the love of my life. I can't imagine living without her. This affair was just a moment of weakness, nothing more." Elise felt bile rise in her throat, a moment of weakness. She'd found evidence of their affair going back 6 months. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even jewelry purchases that had never made it home to her. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a calculated betrayal. But Andrew was relentless. He presented evidence of Derek's multiple affairs, his financial irresponsibility, and his emotional abuse. With each revelation, Derek's facade crumbled a little more, and Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Your Honor," Andrew's voice dominated the courtroom with the authority of a seasoned warrior, "my client has endured systematic betrayal and psychological abuse. The defendant has demonstrated a chronic pattern of infidelity extending far beyond this recent affair. We present documented evidence of at least 3 additional extramarital relationships during their marriage." The courtroom gasped. Elise felt her hands clench into fists. 3 others? She'd suspected there had been others, but hearing it confirmed in open court made her stomach turn. How many women had Derek touched while she lay alone in their bed, waiting for him to come home from his supposed business meetings? Derek's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The judge's expression grew stern as Andrew continued his systematic destruction of Derek's character. With each piece of evidence, each witness testimony, Derek looked smaller and more pathetic. The confident, charming man she'd fallen in love with was revealed to be nothing more than a lying, cheating coward. Then came the moment that would change everything. Andrew called Jessica to the stand as a witness. The young woman, clearly out of her depth in the formal courtroom setting, stumbled through her testimony about the affair. She admitted to knowing Derek was married, admitted to pursuing him despite his wedding ring. And then, in a moment of stunning stupidity, she smiled coyly at the cameras and said, "But Derek told me his wife was cold and didn't understand him like I do. He said she never satisfied him the way a real woman should." The courtroom fell deadly silent. Elise felt something snap inside her chest, not her heart breaking, but her restraint finally giving way to the fury she'd been holding back for weeks. Cold, unsatisfying. She'd given Derek everything, including parts of herself she'd never shared with anyone else. Before anyone could stop her, Elise stood up and walked across the courtroom. Her movements were fluid, predatory, like a panther stalking its prey. Derek's eyes widened in recognition of the storm approaching, and she saw fear flicker across his features. "Elise, don't," Derek started to say, half rising from his chair, his hands held up defensively. The slap echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Elise's open palm connected with Derek's cheek, with enough force to snap his head to the side and send him stumbling backward into his chair. The sound was so sharp, so final, that several people gasped audibly. Her wedding ring, which she still wore, left a small cut on his cheek. 5 years, Elise said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom, each word dripping with pain and fury. 5 years of my life wasted on a coward who couldn't even be faithful to the woman who loved him with everything she had. 5 years of believing your lies, supporting your dreams, and warming your bed while you were out warming others. Derek held his reddening cheek, tears, real ones this time, streaming down his face. "Elise, please, I love you. I've always loved only you." But Elise had already turned away from him, dismissing him as easily as he'd dismissed their marriage vows. She walked with purposeful strides toward Jessica, who shrank back in the witness chair like a cornered animal, her face pale with terror. "And you," Elise said, her voice deadly calm, more frightening in its control than any scream could have been. "You pathetic little girl who thinks stealing another woman's husband makes you special." The second slap was even sharper than the first. Jessica's head whipped to the side, and she let out a small cry of pain and shock. Her hand flew to her cheek as tears began to flow, smearing her heavy makeup. "You want him?" Elise continued, her voice rising with each word, years of suppressed anger finally finding release. "You can have him. You can have his lies, his cheating, his empty promises. But don't you dare sit in this courtroom and insult me by pretending I was anything less than a devoted wife to that worthless excuse for a man." The judge was banging his gavel frantically, calling for order, but Elise wasn't finished. She turned back to face the entire courtroom, her chin raised defiantly, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "Let this be a lesson to every woman here," she declared, her voice ringing with power and pain. "We don't have to accept betrayal quietly. We don't have to suffer in silence while our husbands humiliate us. And we sure as hell don't have to let anyone make us feel small or inadequate for another person's failures." Andrew was on his feet, moving toward her with quick strides. But instead of restraint or disapproval in his eyes, she saw something else entirely: admiration, desire, and a heat that made her knees weak. The way he looked at her in that moment, like she was a goddess of vengeance incarnate, sent fire coursing through her veins. "Your Honor," Andrew said smoothly, placing a protective hand on Elise's lower back, his touch both calming and possessive. "My client has been under enormous emotional strain due to the defendant's repeated betrayals. I request a brief recess to allow her to compose herself." As the judge granted the recess and the courtroom erupted in whispers and camera flashes, Andrew guided Elise out of the room. His hand remained on her back, warm and strong, and she found herself leaning into his strength, drawing comfort from his unwavering support. In the hallway, away from the chaos and prying eyes, Andrew turned to face her. His grey eyes were dark with an emotion she couldn't quite name, but it made her heart race and her skin flush with heat. "That," he said, his voice rough with something that made her pulse race and her body respond in ways it hadn't in years, "was the most magnificent thing I've ever seen." And in that moment, with her heart still pounding from the confrontation and Andrew's intense gaze burning into hers, Elise realized that her old life wasn't just ending. It was about to be replaced by something far more dangerous, infinitely more exciting, and possibly more fulfilling than anything she'd ever imagined possible. Chapter 2. Dangerous Territory. The law offices of Shadrick and Associates occupied the entire 42nd floor of one of the city's most prestigious buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the skyline, and the office itself was a study in power and sophistication. Rich mahogany furniture, leather-bound law books, and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Everything about the space screamed success, control, and masculine dominance. Elise sat across from Andrew's massive desk, trying to focus on the legal documents spread between them, but finding her attention repeatedly drawn to the man himself. It had been 3 days since the courtroom incident, and the media was having a field day with the story. Wronged wife's courthouse revenge had been splashed across every tabloid and news website, complete with high-definition photos of her slapping both Derek and his mistress. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing with interview requests, book deal, offers and messages of support from women around the world. But right now, in the intimate setting of Andrew's office as the sun set over the city, none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Andrew's steel-grey eyes seemed to see straight through her carefully maintained composure to the vulnerable, aching woman beneath. "The preliminary injunction has been granted," Andrew said, his voice professionally neutral, though his eyes held that same dark heat she'd noticed in the courthouse. "Derek can't touch any of your joint accounts or assets until the divorce is finalized. Your house, your car, your business, everything is protected." "Good," Elise replied, though her voice came out huskier than she'd intended. Something about being alone with Andrew in his domain made her hyper-aware of every breath, every movement, every stolen glance. The way he'd defended her in court, the protective way he'd touched her, the admiration in his eyes when she'd stood up for herself. It all combined to create a dangerous cocktail of attraction and gratitude. They'd been conducting evening consultations for 3 consecutive days, ostensibly strategizing her case, but the atmosphere between them pulsed with an undeniable attraction that transcended legal boundaries. When Andrew leaned across to illuminate specific clauses in documents, she'd inhale his intoxicating masculine scent, expensive cologne blended with something uniquely him. Their fingers would accidentally brush, reaching for papers, sending lightning bolts of electricity racing up her arm. "There is one complication," Andrew continued, setting down the papers and leaning back in his leather chair. The movement caused his shirt to pull slightly across his broad chest, and Elise found herself wondering what he looked like underneath the perfectly tailored suit. "Derek's attorney is trying to claim that your outburst in court shows you're emotionally unstable. They're going to argue that you're not fit to receive alimony or a fair settlement." Elise felt a flash of anger. Emotionally unstable. "I caught my husband cheating and reacted like any woman would. If that makes me unstable, then every woman who's ever stood up for herself is crazy." Andrew's lips curved into a smile that was both admiring and predatory. "That's exactly what we're going to argue. But we need to be prepared for them to get dirty. Derek is desperate now. He's facing financial ruin, public humiliation, and the loss of everything he thought he was entitled to. Desperate men do desperate things." As if summoned by their conversation, Andrew's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. "Speaking of desperate," he showed her the screen. "Derek's been calling my office all day, demanding to speak with you. My assistant has been screening the calls, but he's getting increasingly aggressive." Elise shook her head in disgust. "He still thinks he can manipulate me, even now. For 5 years, whenever I got angry about something he'd done, he'd wear me down with tears and promises until I forgave him. He can't accept that this time is different. What transformed this situation?" Andrew inquired gently, his tone suggesting her response held paramount importance to him. Elise was quiet for a long moment, considering how to explain the shift that had occurred inside her. I think I finally saw him clearly for the first time. Not the man I wanted him to be, or the man he pretended to be when he wanted something from me. I saw the real Derek, selfish, weak, cowardly, and I realized I deserved so much better. The way Andrew looked at her when she said those words made her breath catch. His gaze dropped to her lips for just a moment before returning to her eyes, and she felt heat pool low in her belly. "You do deserve better," he said, his voice dropping to that low, rough tone that made her skin tingle. "You deserve a man who would worship the ground you walk on, who would never even think of looking at another woman when he has you in his bed." The words hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and desire. Elise felt her heart racing, her body responding to the promise in his voice. This was dangerous territory. He was her attorney. She was technically still married, and she'd been betrayed so recently that she should be focusing on healing, not on the way Andrew's hands looked as he gripped the arms of his chair. But God, she wanted those hands on her body. "Andrew," she whispered, not sure if she was about to tell him to stop or beg him to continue. He stood up slowly, moving around the desk with the fluid grace of a predator. When he reached her chair, he placed his hands on the armrests, caging her in without actually touching her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the pulse beating rapidly in his throat. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly, his face inches from hers. "Tell me this is wrong, that you're not ready, that I'm taking advantage of your vulnerability. Tell me, and I'll step back and pretend this never happened." Elise looked up into his eyes and saw her own desire reflected there, multiplied and intensified. She should tell him to stop. She should be the responsible one, the mature one who recognized that this was too much, too soon, too complicated. Instead, she reached up and traced the line of his jaw with one finger. "What if I don't want you to stop?" Andrew's control snapped. He pulled her to her feet and backed her against the floor-to-ceiling window, his body pressing against hers as his mouth came down on hers in a kiss that was anything but gentle. It was hungry, desperate, full of weeks of suppressed attraction and need. His hands tangled in her hair, destroying her careful updo, and she moaned into his mouth as she felt truly desired for the first time in years. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Andrew rested his forehead against hers. "This is insane," he murmured, but his hands were still gripping her waist, holding her against him. "I know," Elise replied, her voice shaky with want. "I know it's too soon. I know it's complicated. I know all the reasons why we shouldn't do this. But Andrew, I haven't felt alive in so long. Derek made me feel invisible, unwanted, like I was just another piece of furniture in his life. But when you look at me, when I look at you, I see a goddess," Andrew finished, his thumb tracing her swollen lips. "I see strength and beauty and fire. I see everything Derek was too stupid to appreciate." His words were like balm to her wounded soul. For so long, she'd wondered if maybe Derek was right, maybe she was cold, maybe she wasn't enough. But the way Andrew looked at her, touched her, spoke to her, it made her feel like the most desirable woman in the world. "I want you," she admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "I know I shouldn't, I know it's crazy, but I want you so much it hurts." Andrew groaned and kissed her again, softer this time, but no less intense. "We should wait," he said against her lips, even as his hands roamed over her curves. "We should take this slow, do this right." "I'm tired of doing things right," Elise replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "I spent 5 years being the perfect wife to a man who never deserved me. I want to be reckless. I want to feel passion again. I want you to make me forget Derek ever existed." The sound Andrew made was somewhere between a growl and a moan. His hands tightened on her waist, and she could feel the evidence of his desire pressing against her. "Elise, if we do this now, there's no going back. I won't be able to pretend it was just the heat of the moment, or a mistake brought on by stress. I want you too much for games or pretense." "Then don't pretend," she whispered, her hands sliding up his chest to loop around his neck. "Don't treat me like I'm fragile or broken. I'm not a victim, Andrew. I'm a woman who knows what she wants." The last of Andrew's restraint crumbled. He kissed her with renewed hunger, his hands roaming over her body with a reverence that made her feel worshipped. Against the backdrop of the glittering city lights, they lost themselves in each other, crossing a line that would change everything between them. Later, as they lay entwined on the leather couch in his office, Elise's head on Andrew's chest, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete contentment. Andrew's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, and she could feel his heart beating steadily beneath her ear. No regrets? He asked quietly. Elise lifted her head to look at him, taking in his tousled hair and satisfied expression. None, she said firmly. For the first time in years, I feel like myself again, like I'm worth something. Andrew's eyes darkened with emotion. You're worth everything, he said, pulling her up for another kiss. And I'm going to spend every day proving that to you. As they kissed again, soft and slow and full of promise, Elise realized that her life was about to become infinitely more complicated. But for the first time since her world had crashed down around her, she was looking forward to what came next. Chapter 3. Forbidden Desire. 2 intense weeks had elapsed since that transformative night in Andrew's office, and their relationship had evolved into an intoxicating fusion of professional obligation and personal obsession. Every strategic conference metamorphosed into stolen moments of passion. Every legal discussion became intimate foreplay, and every separation felt like exquisite torment. Elise had never experienced the consuming hunger Andrew awakened within her, a primal, soul-deep craving that dominated her thoughts and left her body perpetually aching for his masterful touch. The connection between them had transcended mere physical attraction. When Andrew looked at her with those penetrating grey eyes, she felt seen in a way Derek had never managed in 5 years of marriage. When his fingers traced her skin with reverent touches, she felt worshipped. When he made love to her with that perfect combination of dominance and tenderness, she felt complete for the first time in her life. Tonight, they were preparing for what Andrew called the nuclear option, a court session where he would systematically destroy Derek's claims to any of Elise's assets. Derek's attorney had been making increasingly desperate moves, trying to paint Elise as an unfit spouse who had driven her husband to infidelity through her own shortcomings. The strategy was as pathetic as it was insulting, but Andrew was ready to obliterate it completely. The atmosphere in Andrew's office crackled with anticipation and barely restrained desire. Elise had arrived wearing a form-fitting black dress that hugged every curve of her magnificent body, and Andrew found himself struggling to concentrate on legal strategy when all he wanted was to worship her with his mouth and hands until she screamed his name in ecstasy. He's claiming you were emotionally distant and refused to fulfill your wifely duties, Andrew said, his voice tight with controlled rage as he read from Derek's latest filing. They were in his office again, the city lights twinkling below them like scattered diamonds. But this time, the atmosphere was charged with more than just desire. It was electric with the promise of total victory and the magnetic pull of their undeniable connection. Elise laughed bitterly, pacing behind Andrew's desk in the black silk dress that clung to her curves like liquid midnight. Her natural hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves, and her amber eyes blazed with righteous fury that only made her more beautiful in Andrew's eyes. Wifely duties? What century does he think we're living in? I supported that man's every dream, encouraged his pathetic business ventures, and yes, I satisfied him in bed whenever he wanted, however he wanted. I gave him everything a woman could give, including parts of my soul I can never get back. The problem wasn't my performance. It was his complete inability to appreciate the treasure he possessed. Andrew stood slowly, his grey eyes darkening with a mixture of protective fury and consuming desire. The way Elise moved, the passion in her voice, the fire in her eyes, it all combined to make her irresistible. He moved to intercept her pacing, his hands gripping her shoulders gently but firmly, feeling the silk of her dress and the warmth of her skin beneath. Tomorrow, I'm going to present evidence that will destroy him so completely he'll wish he'd never been born, Andrew said, his voice dropping to that low, rough tone that never failed to make Elise's knees weak. Financial records showing how you funded his lifestyle while he squandered your generosity. testimony from friends and colleagues about your devotion to the marriage while he was betraying you. Medical records proving you sought therapy to try to save your relationship while he was fucking other women behind your back. By the time I'm done, the judge will see Derek for exactly what he is. A parasitic failure who destroyed his own marriage through greed, weakness, and an inability to recognize the goddess he was blessed to call his wife. The fierce protectiveness in Andrew's voice sent molten heat coursing through Elise's veins. In just a few weeks, this magnificent man had become her champion, her lover, her salvation, and her obsession, all rolled into one devastatingly attractive package. The way he fought for her with such passion, the way he touched her like she was precious beyond measure, the way he looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman who had ever drawn breath. It was everything she'd dreamed of and never received from Derek. "I can't believe I ever thought what I felt for Derek was love," she whispered, her hands sliding up Andrew's chest to rest against his thundering heart. "What I felt for him was nothing, a pale shadow compared to this consuming fire you've ignited in my soul. Nothing compared to the way you make me feel when you're buried deep inside me, when you're holding me like I'm the most precious thing in your world, when you're looking at me like you are right now, like you want to devour me completely." Andrew's hands framed her face, his thumbs tracing the elegant line of her cheekbones as he gazed into her amber eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Derek never deserved you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "He had a goddess in his bed every night and was too much of a fool to worship her properly. But I see you, Elise. I see your strength, your beauty, your incredible capacity for love, and I'll spend every day of my life making sure you never doubt your worth again." Before she could respond, he was kissing her with a hunger that bordered on desperation, pouring all his love and desire and protective fury into the contact. His mouth moved over hers with practiced skill, his tongue dancing with hers in a rhythm that promised greater intimacies to come. Andrew's eyes darkened with primal hunger, and she felt the familiar rush of feminine power that came from knowing she could affect this strong, controlled man so completely. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer until she could feel every hard line of his powerful body against her softer curves, could feel the evidence of his desire pressing against her belly. "You have no idea what you do to me," he growled against her lips, his voice rough with barely restrained need. "I've been thinking about you all day, remembering how you looked last night when I had you bent over this very desk, how your back arched when I thrust into you from behind, how you called my name when you came apart in my arms, like you were dying from pleasure. I can barely focus on work anymore because all I can think about is getting you naked and making you mine all over again, marking every inch of your perfect body so thoroughly that you'll never forget who you belong to." Elise moaned softly, her body already responding to his words and the scorching heat in his eyes. The memory of their lovemaking the night before, wild and desperate on his desk, then slow and tender on his couch, sent liquid fire racing through her veins. "Then do it," she challenged, her hands moving to the buttons of his shirt with trembling fingers. "Make me forget everything except the way you feel moving inside me. Make me remember why I chose you over safety, over everything else in the world." They came together with the desperate hunger of lovers who couldn't get enough of each other, who knew that what they shared was rare and precious and worth fighting for. Andrew lifted her onto his desk with ease, his powerful hands making her feel delicate and feminine, despite her own strength. Legal papers scattered to the floor as his mouth claimed hers in a kiss that was all teeth and tongue and barely controlled passion, a claiming that spoke of possession and worship in equal measure. His hands roamed over her body with the confidence of a man who knew exactly how to drive her wild, sliding up her thighs beneath the silk of her dress, finding the sensitive spots that made her gasp and arch against him. Every touch was reverent yet possessive, gentle yet demanding, a perfect balance that no other man had ever achieved. I love the way you respond to me, Andrew murmured against her throat, his lips and teeth marking her in ways that would be visible tomorrow. The way your body comes alive under my hands, the way you trust me completely with your pleasure. Derek never appreciated this gift, did he? Never made you feel like the goddess you are? Never, Elise gasped, her hands fisting in his hair as he worshipped her neck with his mouth. He made me feel like I was asking for too much, wanting too much, but you... God, Andrew, you make me feel like I'm not enough woman for one man to handle. You're not, Andrew growled, his hands working to free her from the confines of her dress. You're too much beauty, too much passion, too much perfection for any ordinary man. That's why Derek couldn't handle you. That's why he had to seek validation from lesser women who didn't challenge him to be better. The sound of Andrew's phone buzzing cut through their heated moment like a bucket of cold water. They froze, both breathing hard, staring at each other with wild eyes and disheveled clothing. The outside world had intruded on their private sanctuary once again. "Ignore it," Elise whispered, her hands still gripping his shirt, but the phone kept buzzing, insistent and shrill. Andrew cursed under his breath and reached for it, his expression darkening when he saw the caller ID. "It's my private investigator," he said grimly. "He only calls after hours if it's urgent." Andrew answered the call, while Elise tried to calm her racing heart and smooth her disheveled appearance. She watched his face grow increasingly stormy as he listened to whatever information was being relayed. When he finally hung up, his expression was a mixture of rage and grim satisfaction. "What is it?" Elise asked, smoothing down her dress and trying to calm her racing pulse. "Derek's been busy," Andrew said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Apparently, he's been meeting with someone, a very wealthy someone who's been making him promises about getting you back." Elise felt a chill run down her spine, despite the heat still coursing through her veins from their interrupted encounter. "What kind of promises?" Andrew's jaw clenched as he struggled to control his protective instincts, the kind that involve money, influence, and a complete disregard for your right to make your own choices. My investigator managed to get photos of Derek meeting with Vincent Kane, one of the wealthiest men in the city, known for his unconventional business practices and his collection of beautiful women. The implications hit Elise like a physical blow. Even now, even after everything, Derek was still trying to treat her like property to be bartered and sold. "You think Derek is trying to—" "I think Derek is so desperate to get you back that he's willing to make a deal with the devil himself," Andrew finished grimly. "Vincent Kane doesn't do anything out of the goodness of his heart. If he's interested in your situation, it's because he wants something in return." Elise felt sick to her stomach. The idea that Derek would involve a stranger in their personal business, that he would expose her to potential danger in his quest to reclaim what he'd thrown away, was almost too much to bear. Andrew pulled her into his arms, his embrace both comforting and possessive. "We prepare for war," he said simply. "Tomorrow's court session just became even more important. We're going to destroy Derek so completely that no amount of money or influence will be able to save him. And then we're going to make sure Vincent Kane understands that you're under my protection now." The possessive way Andrew said those words sent a thrill through Elise that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the primal satisfaction of knowing she belonged to a man strong enough to protect her from any threat. "I'm not afraid," she said, and realized with surprise that it was true. "Let Derek and his rich friend try whatever they want. They'll learn what happens when they underestimate a woman who's finally found her strength." Andrew's smile was predatory and proud. "That's my fierce goddess," he murmured, kissing her deeply. "Tomorrow we show them exactly what they're up against." As they lost themselves in each other once again, the legal papers forgotten on the floor around them, Elise felt a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with fear. Derek had spent 5 years trying to diminish her, control her, make her Small, but he had no idea what he'd unleashed when he betrayed her and drove her into the arms of a man who saw her true worth. Tomorrow would bring the battle that would determine her future, and with Andrew by her side, she was ready for anything their enemies could throw at them. Chapter 4. The Proposition. The courthouse atmosphere was electric with anticipation as media crews and spectators assembled for what journalists had sensationally labeled the divorce trial of the decade. Elise moved through the corridors with Andrew beside her, their interlinked fingers presenting a unified front that spoke volumes about their commitment. She wore a striking emerald dress that magnificently complemented her radiant dark skin, and her restored confidence made her practically luminescent with inner strength. Derek sat at the defendant's table, looking like a broken man. The past few weeks had taken their toll. His face was gaunt, his expensive clothes hung loosely on his frame, and his eyes held the desperate gleam of a man watching his world crumble. Beside him, his attorney looked equally defeated, clearly aware that they were about to be systematically destroyed. Andrew was magnificent in his element. He presented evidence with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a warrior. Financial records showed how Elise had supported Derek's failing business ventures with her own money. Character witnesses testified to her devotion as a wife and her attempts to save their marriage even after discovering his infidelities. Medical records revealed that Elise had sought counseling and therapy to address Derek's complaints about their relationship, while he had refused to participate. "Your Honor," Andrew's voice rang through the courtroom with commanding authority, "the evidence clearly shows that my client was not only a devoted wife, but the primary financial supporter of this marriage, while she was building a successful career and funding her husband's dreams. He was systematically betraying her trust with multiple affairs, spanning the entirety of their marriage." Derek's attorney made weak attempts to object, but each piece of evidence was ironclad. Andrew had done his homework, and Derek's claims about Elise being a neglectful wife crumbled under the weight of documented reality. The most devastating moment came when Andrew presented phone records showing that Derek had been in contact with his mistresses even during their honeymoon. The collective gasp from the gallery was audible, and Elise saw several women in the audience look at Derek with undisguised disgust. "Mr. Morrison," Andrew addressed Derek directly, his voice calm but lethal. "Is it true that you purchased a $5,000 necklace for Jessica Walsh using funds from your wife's business account?" Derek squirmed in his seat, his face flushing red with shame. Yes, but and is it true that this purchase was made on the same day your wife was in the hospital receiving treatment for stress-related health issues caused by your emotional abuse?" "I wouldn't call it abuse." "Answer the question, Mr. Morrison. Yes or no?" "Yes," Derek whispered, unable to meet Elise's eyes. Andrew continued his methodical destruction, revealing detail after detail of Derek's betrayals and financial manipulations. By the time he was finished, Derek looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Derek would receive no alimony, no claim to Elise's business or assets, and would be required to pay her legal fees. His claims of being a wronged husband were dismissed with prejudice. As they left the courthouse, Elise felt lighter than she had in years. Justice had been served, and Derek's attempts to portray himself as the victim had been exposed for the lies they were, but their celebration was short-lived. That evening, as they were having dinner at Andrew's penthouse apartment, Derek appeared at the door, unannounced. The doorman had let him up before Andrew could intervene, and now he stood in the hallway looking like a man who had lost everything. "Please," Derek begged, his voice breaking with emotion. "Just give me 5 minutes. I need to talk to both of you." Andrew moved protectively in front of Elise, his body tense with barely controlled aggression. "You have nothing to say that we want to hear. Leave now, or I'll call security." But Elise surprised them both by stepping forward. "Let him speak," she said calmly. "I want to hear what he has to say." Derek's eyes filled with desperate hope. "Elise, I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I still love you. I've always loved you. Everything I did, every choice I made, it was because I felt inadequate compared to your success, your strength. I was weak, and I'm sorry." "You were more than weak," Elise replied coldly. "You were cruel. You systematically destroyed my self-worth, while stealing my money to fund your affairs. That's not weakness, Derek. That's evil." Derek flinched as if she'd slapped him again. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. I've been talking to someone who can help us start over. Vincent Kane, he's a businessman, very wealthy, very influential. He's offered to help me get back on my feet financially if... What? Andrew interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. Derek's face flushed with shame, but desperation drove him forward. "If Elise agrees to spend some time with him, just a weekend, maybe a week. He's very taken with her beauty, and he's willing to pay handsomely for her company." The silence that followed was deafening. Elise felt like she'd been physically struck. After everything, the divorce, the humiliation, the complete destruction of their marriage, Derek was actually trying to pimp her out to save himself. Andrew moved with lightning speed, grabbing Derek by the throat and slamming him against the wall. "You pathetic piece of garbage," he growled, his face inches from Derek's. "Are you actually trying to sell your ex-wife like a prostitute?" "It's not like that," Derek gasped, clawing at Andrew's hand. "Vincent is a gentleman, very refined. He just wants her company for social events, maybe some private moments. He's offering $2 million, Elise. Think about what we could do with that money." Elise found her voice, and when she spoke it was with ice-cold fury. "We? There is no we, Derek. There never will be again. And the fact that you think I would even consider prostituting myself to help the man who destroyed my life shows just how little you actually know me. But the money means nothing to me compared to my self-respect," Elise snapped. "Something you never understood and clearly still don't." Andrew released Derek, who slumped against the wall, gasping for breath. "You have 10 seconds to get out of my apartment before I throw you off the balcony," Andrew said quietly, and something in his tone made it clear he wasn't bluffing. Derek straightened his clothes, his face cycling through emotions: shame, anger, desperation, and finally a cold calculation that made Elise's skin crawl. "Vincent Kane doesn't take no for an answer," Derek said, his voice taking on a threatening tone. "He's used to getting what he wants, and he wants Elise. If she won't come willingly, he has other ways of persuading people." Andrew stepped forward, again, but Derek was already backing toward the door. "This isn't over," Derek said, looking directly at Elise. "You belong with me, not with him. I'll make you see that, whatever it takes." After Derek left, Elise collapsed onto Andrew's couch, her hands shaking with rage and disgust. Andrew sat beside her, pulling her into his arms and holding her tightly. "I can't believe he actually tried to—" she started, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "The man you married is gone," Andrew said quietly, his hand stroking her hair. "This Derek, the one who just left, he's a stranger. Desperation and entitlement have turned him into something monstrous." Elise pulled back to look at Andrew, seeing the worry in his eyes. "You think this Vincent Kane is really a threat?" Andrew's expression darkened. "Men like Kane don't make idle threats. He's powerful, wealthy, and used to taking whatever he wants. But he's about to learn that some things aren't for sale, and some women are under the protection of men who won't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatens them." The possessive intensity in Andrew's voice sent heat rushing through Elise's body, despite the circumstances. "What do we do?" Andrew's smile was predatory and cold. "We prepare for war. Kane wants to play games? Fine. But he picked the wrong woman to target, and he definitely picked the wrong man to cross. That night, as they made love with desperate intensity, Elise felt the walls of their safe bubble beginning to crack. The outside world, with all its threats and complications, was closing in on their newfound happiness. But as Andrew moved above her, whispering words of love and protection, she knew she would rather face any danger with him than live safely without him. The battle for her freedom was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Chapter 5. Heart. Ver's mind, the weeks following Derek's outrageous proposition, had transformed into a whirlwind of security precautions, legal preparations, and precious stolen moments of passion between Elise and Andrew. Vincent Kane maintained his ominous silence, yet his malevolent presence shadowed their lives like an approaching storm. Andrew had implemented comprehensive protective measures, hiring elite private security, installing state-of-the-art surveillance systems, and ensuring his extensive network of legal and business contacts understood that Elise Wood remained under his personal protection. But it was the psychological warfare that concerned Andrew most deeply. He could see the invisible wounds in Elise's expressive amber eyes, the way she startled at unexpected sounds, the subtle tension that had crept into her graceful shoulders despite his relentless efforts to shield her from Kane's insidious influence. She was strong, stronger than any woman he'd ever encountered, but even the most resilient steel could be worn down by constant pressure and fear. Tonight, they were cocooned in the sanctuary of Andrew's penthouse, the glittering city lights, creating a romantic backdrop as they shared an intimate dinner and desperately tried to pretend their world wasn't under siege. Elise wore a flowing silk nightgown that clung to her curves in ways that made Andrew's mouth go dry with desire, her natural beauty enhanced by the soft candlelight flickering between them like dancing spirits. The silk fabric seemed to caress her dark skin with each movement, and Andrew found himself mesmerized by the way the material shifted and flowed around her body. Even in the midst of their crisis, she remained the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, graceful, elegant, and radiating an inner strength that took his breath away. My investigator reports that Derek has been spotted around Kane's estate several times this week, Andrew said carefully, not wanting to upset her but knowing she needed to be informed of every development. It appears their partnership is becoming more intimate. Kane is treating Derek almost like a personal assistant now, which suggests their arrangement goes deeper than we initially thought. Elise set down her wine glass with deliberate precision, her amber eyes flashing with a complex mixture of anger, hurt, and bitter disappointment. I can't reconcile the man I married with this creature Derek has become. It's as if he's transformed into someone completely unrecognizable. Or perhaps this is who he always was, beneath the charming facade, and I was simply too naive to see it. The pain in her voice cut through Andrew like a blade. He could see how Derek's betrayal had shaken her faith not just in her ex-husband, but in her own judgment. The self-doubt that flickered across her features made him want to hunt Derek down and destroy him for daring to make this magnificent woman question her own worth. Andrew reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb stroking over her knuckles in a gesture that had become automatic between them, a silent communication of comfort and unwavering support. You saw the good in people because that reflects who you are at your core, Elise. Derek exploited your loving, trusting nature, but that's his moral failure, not yours. Your capacity for love and faith in others is one of your greatest strengths, not a weakness to be ashamed of. Sometimes I torture myself wondering if this is all my fault, Elise admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper as she voiced her deepest fears. Maybe if I'd been a better wife, more attentive to his needs, more understanding of his insecurities, Maybe if I hadn't been so focused on my career, so independent and strong-willed. Stop. Andrew's voice was sharp enough to cut through her self-recrimination like a sword through silk. He stood abruptly and moved around the table, pulling her to her feet and framing her exquisite face with his hands. Don't you dare blame yourself for his choices. You were everything a man could dream of in a wife. Loving, supportive, beautiful, intelligent, successful. Derek threw that away because he's weak, selfish, and fundamentally broken as a human being, not because you weren't enough. The fierce conviction in Andrew's voice brought tears to Elise's eyes, but they were tears of relief rather than sorrow. How do you always know exactly what I need to hear? How do you see through all my fears and doubts to the truth underneath? Because I see you, Andrew said simply, his thumbs wiping away the tears that had begun to fall down her cheeks. I see your strength, your beauty, your incredible worth, and I'll spend every day of my life making sure you never doubt those things again. You are perfection, Elise, not because you're flawless, but because you're exactly who you're meant to be. Their kiss was soft and tender initially, full of love rather than the desperate passion that usually consumed them. But as Andrew's hands tangled in her hair and Elise melted against his powerful frame, the gentle contact transformed into something deeper, more urgent, more necessary than breathing itself. I need you, Elise whispered against his lips. Her hands sliding up his chest to loop around his neck. I need to feel alive again, need to remember what it's like to be cherished and desired. Derek made me feel invisible for so long, but when you touch me, when you look at me the way you're looking at me now, when I look at you, I see everything I've ever wanted. Andrew finished, his voice rough with emotion and desire. I see my future, my happiness, my reason for breathing. You're not just the woman I love, Elise. You're the woman I worship. He lifted her into his arms with effortless strength, carrying her to the living room where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city below. Setting her down gently, he began to worship her body with his hands and mouth, each caress a promise, each kiss a declaration of his absolute devotion. The silk nightgown whispered to the floor, pooling around her feet like liquid moonlight, leaving her gloriously bare before him. Andrew's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet room, his grey eyes darkening with hunger and reverence as he drank in the sight of her. You're so beautiful it actually hurts to look at you sometimes, he murmured, his hands skimming over her curves with the reverent touch of a man handling something precious beyond measure. Perfect in every way, your skin like silk, your curves that fit my hands like they were made for me, the way you respond to my touch like your body, was created specifically to be loved by mine. Elise felt herself blooming under his adoration, her confidence returning as she saw herself reflected in his hungry gaze. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Being cherished, worshipped, made to feel like the most desirable woman in the world. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sharp ring of Andrew's phone, cutting through their intimate bubble like a knife through velvet. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned deeply. It was his private line, the number only a handful of trusted people possessed. Andrew Shadrick, he answered curtly, his free arm wrapping protectively around Elise's waist. Mr. Shadrick, this is Vincent Kane. The voice was smooth, cultured, and filled with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way without question. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance in the lovely Elise Wood. Andrew's entire body went rigid, his free hand automatically moving to pull Elise closer to him in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. The sound of Kane's voice in their sacred space felt like a violation, a contamination of their perfect sanctuary. Mr. Kane, I was wondering when you'd finally show your face instead of skulking in the shadows like a coward. Kane's laughter was warm and genuinely amused, which somehow made it more chilling than any threat could have been. I prefer the direct approach when dealing with intelligent people, don't you? I have a proposition for you, and for the beautiful Miss Wood, of course. I'm sure she's listening." "I've heard about your propositions," Andrew said coldly, his voice like ice over steel. "The answer is no, now and forever." "You haven't heard the terms yet," Kane replied smoothly, his tone suggesting he held all the cards in this deadly game. "I'm a reasonable man, Mr. Shadrick. I understand that Elise has formed an attachment to you. I'm willing to work within those parameters. All I want is one weekend with her, 48 hours of her time, nothing more, nothing less. In exchange, I'll pay off Derek's considerable debts, set him up in a new business venture far from this city, and transfer $5 million into an account of your choosing." Elise could hear every word through the phone with crystal clarity, and Andrew watched her beautiful face cycle through emotions, disgust, anger, and something that looked disturbingly like consideration. His heart clenched with fear that she might actually be tempted by the offer, that the stress and uncertainty might drive her to consider the unthinkable. "Mr. Kane," Andrew said, his voice deadly calm despite the rage boiling in his veins, "let me make something perfectly clear. Elise Wood is not for sale at any price. She's not a commodity to be bought and traded like a piece of art or real estate. She's the woman I love more than my own life, and she's under my protection. If you contact her, approach her, or even think about her inappropriately, I will destroy you with every resource at my disposal." "Such passionate devotion," Kane mused, sounding genuinely entertained by Andrew's vehemence. "I do admire that in a man. But let me ask you something, Mr. Shadrick. Are you willing to let your pride cost the woman you love her freedom and peace of mind? Because I can make Derek disappear permanently from both your lives. Ensure he never bothers either of you again. All it costs is 48 hours. Andrew felt Elise stiffen in his arms, and when he looked down at her, he saw something in her eyes that terrified him to his very core. She was actually considering it. The woman he loved was contemplating sacrificing herself to protect their future together. "I need to think about this," Elise said, speaking directly toward the phone, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. "No," Andrew said immediately, his grip on her tightening almost desperately. "Absolutely not. We don't negotiate with terrorists, and we sure as hell don't sacrifice you to save ourselves from inconvenience." "How refreshing to hear from a woman who thinks for herself," Kane said, his pleasure evident in his tone. "Intelligence is such an attractive quality. I'll give you 24 hours to consider my offer, my dear. After that, the terms become significantly less favorable for everyone involved." The line went dead, leaving Andrew and Elise staring at each other in the sudden, oppressive silence that filled the room like a living thing. "Tell me you're not actually considering this," Andrew said, his voice rough with barely contained emotion. "And fear." Elise pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself as she moved toward the window overlooking the city that suddenly felt full of threats and watching eyes. "You heard him, Andrew. He can make Derek disappear completely. We could be free of all this, the threats, the fear, the constant looking over our shoulders, the way this nightmare is poisoning our happiness. At the cost of you prostituting yourself to a stranger," Andrew exploded, his carefully maintained control finally snapping under the pressure of his worst nightmare becoming reality. "How can you even think about it? How can you consider letting another man touch you, use you, violate everything we have together?" Elise whirled around to face him, her own temper flaring in response to his anguish. "Because I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of Derek having any power over our lives. I'm tired of seeing the worry in your eyes every time I leave the apartment. If 2 days with Kane means we can have forever without this shadow hanging over us, maybe it's worth the sacrifice." "Worth it?" Andrew stared at her in disbelief, feeling like she'd driven a knife into his heart and twisted it. "Worth letting another man touch you, use you, violate everything sacred between us, worth destroying the trust and intimacy we've built together? It would be just my body, Elise said, but her voice lacked conviction even as she spoke the words. My heart, my soul, everything that really matters, those belong to you. They always will, no matter what happens. Andrew felt like she'd physically struck him. The idea of another man's hands on her perfect body, another man claiming what belonged, to him, was literally nauseating. Your body belongs to me too, he said quietly, moving toward her with the fluid grace of a predator. Every inch of you is mine, just like every inch of me is yours. That's what love means, Elise. That's what marriage vows and lifelong commitment mean. When he reached her, he backed her against the cool glass of the window, his hands braced on either side of her head, caging her in without actually touching her. Look at me, he commanded, and when she raised her eyes to his, he saw his own pain and desperation reflected there. Tell me you can imagine another man's hands on your body and feel nothing. Tell me you can let someone else inside you. Let them claim you the way I do, and not feel like you're betraying everything we've built together. Tears streamed down Elise's face as the reality of what Cain was asking really hit her with devastating force. I can't, she whispered, her voice breaking with anguish. God, Andrew, I can't even think about it without feeling like I'm going to be sick. Then don't, Andrew said, his voice breaking with relief as he pulled her into his arms. We'll find another way. We'll fight Cain, fight Derek, fight the whole damn world if we have to, but we do it together, without compromising who we are or what we mean to each other. Elise collapsed against his chest, sobbing with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. I'm so scared, she admitted, her voice muffled against his skin. What if Cain doesn't accept no for an answer? What if he tries to force the issue? What if he hurts you to get to me? Then I'll kill him, Andrew said simply, and the matter-of-fact way he said it made it clear he wasn't speaking metaphorically. Before I let anyone hurt you, before I let anyone take you from me, I'll burn the whole city down. As Andrew held her trembling form against his chest, both of them understood that they had just crossed another line in their relationship. Cain's proposition had forced them to confront the absolute depths of their feelings for each other, and what they'd discovered was both beautiful and terrifying in its intensity. They loved each other enough to consider the unthinkable and loved each other too much to actually go through with it. But Vincent Cain wasn't the type of man who accepted rejection gracefully, and Derek was too desperate to give up easily. The real battle for their future was just beginning, and they both knew it would test every aspect of their love and commitment. Together, they would face whatever came next, and together they would emerge victorious or not at all. Chapter 6. The Indecent Proposal. The 24-hour deadline had passed with agonizing slowness, each minute stretching like an eternity of psychological torment. Andrew had remained virtually sleepless, spending the night cradling Elise protectively, while his strategic mind analyzed every conceivable scenario and defensive option. By dawn, they had reached their unified decision. They would confront Vincent Cain together and definitively reject his proposition, regardless of the potentially devastating consequences that might follow. The morning light streaming through, their penthouse windows felt different somehow, sharper, more ominous, as if the very air around them had been charged with impending doom. They had spent the early hours making love with desperate tenderness, each touch a promise, each kiss a vow that whatever came next, they would face it as one. Elise had never felt more beautiful or more cherished than she did in Andrew's arms as the sun rose over the city. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, as if memorizing every curve, every sensitive spot, every reaction that made her gasp and arch beneath him. Their lovemaking was both fierce and gentle, urgent and reverent, a perfect expression of their love in the face of an uncertain future. But Cain, it seemed, had other plans that would shatter their fragile peace. The Call came at exactly noon, this time to Elise's personal phone. She answered it with trembling fingers, while Andrew listened on speaker, his jaw clenched with barely controlled fury that someone dared to intrude on their sanctuary yet again. "Good afternoon, my dear." Kane's smooth voice filled their bedroom, like poison honey. "I trust you've had time to consider my generous offer with the clarity that a good night's rest can provide." "Mr. Kane," Elise said, her voice steadier than she felt as Andrew's hand found hers and squeezed reassuringly, "I appreciate your interest, but I'm not available for the arrangement you're proposing. I'm deeply in love with Andrew, and I won't betray that love for any amount of money or convenience." Kane's laughter was warm and genuinely amused, but underneath the pleasantness was something cold and calculating that made her skin crawl. How wonderfully romantic and naive. "But I'm afraid you may want to reconsider after you hear what I have to tell you about your current situation." Andrew felt a chill run down his spine. Men like Kane didn't call to accept rejection gracefully. They called when they held all the cards and were ready to play their winning hand. "You see," Kane continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than destroying lives, "your ex-husband Derek has been quite helpful in providing me with some very interesting information about both of you. Did you know, for instance, that Mr. Shadrick has been using rather unethical tactics in his legal practice? Bribing witnesses, threatening opposing counsel, hiding evidence from the court system." "That's a lie," Andrew said immediately, but his blood had turned to ice in his veins. He'd never done any of those things, but in Kane's world of unlimited resources and flexible morality, truth was entirely negotiable. "Oh, but I have such convincing evidence," Kane replied with mock sadness, like a teacher disappointed in a particularly slow student. "Video recordings of meetings with known criminals, financial records showing suspicious transactions, signed affidavits from very credible witnesses attesting to Mr. Shadrick's corruption. All fabricated with meticulous attention to detail, of course, but the legal system can be so terribly slow to sort out truth from fiction. By the time Mr. Shadrick's name is cleared, if it ever is, his career will be in ruins, his assets frozen indefinitely, and his reputation destroyed beyond any hope of recovery." Elise felt the blood drain from her face as the full scope of Kane's trap became clear. This wasn't just about money or desire, this was about power, control, and the complete subjugation of everyone who dared to oppose him. "You're blackmailing us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Such an ugly pedestrian word," Kane said with genuine distaste, as if she'd used profanity in polite company. "I prefer to think of it as expanding your options and helping you see the situation more clearly. You see, my dear Elise, I always get what I want. Always. The question is whether you come to me willingly as my honored guest, or whether I have to systematically destroy everyone you care about first." Andrew's hands clenched into fists, his entire body vibrating with rage, so pure it was almost visible. "You son of a bitch!" Now, Kane interrupted smoothly, his tone remaining pleasant despite the venom underneath. "Violence won't solve anything, Mr. Shadrick. Besides, you'll want to save your energy for more pressing concerns. You see, Derek has been exceptionally creative in his assistance to my cause. He's provided me with detailed information about Elise's daily routines, her favorite restaurants, her gym schedule, the route she takes to work, even the security codes to your building. It would be so tragically easy for something unfortunate to happen if she continues to be uncooperative with my reasonable requests." The threat hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, making it difficult to breathe. Elise felt Andrew's protective fury radiating from him in waves, but she also saw the terrible calculation in his eyes. He was weighing their options and finding them all leading to destruction. "Derek has also been quite forthcoming about your relationship," Kane continued, his voice taking on a hungry, predatory edge that made Elise's skin crawl. How passionate you are, how responsive, how exquisitely beautiful you look when you're thoroughly satisfied. I find myself quite eager to experience these qualities firsthand. Andrew looked like he was ready to commit murder with his bare hands, his grey eyes blazing with protective fury. If you touch her, what exactly are you proposing? Elise asked quietly, cutting through Andrew's threat. Every word felt like swallowing broken glass, but she needed to know the full scope of what they were facing. "One weekend," Kane said, his voice taking on that hungry edge that made her feel violated just hearing it. "Friday evening to Sunday night. You'll accompany me to several high-profile social events as my companion, and afterward, we'll explore the more intimate aspects of our arrangement. In exchange, all evidence against Mr. Shadrick disappears permanently. Derek is relocated to another continent with enough money to start fresh and never bother you again, and you both return to your happy little life together. And if I refuse?" Kane's sigh was theatrical and filled with mock regret. "Then Monday morning, Mr. Shadrick will be arrested on federal charges that will make headlines across the country. Derek will contest the divorce settlement with new evidence of your affair during the marriage proceedings, dragging your name through every tabloid and gossip column. Your reputation, your business, your entire life will be dissected in the media like a laboratory specimen. And Elise, darling, accidents happen so easily in this city. A mugging gone wrong, a car accident caused by brake failure, a gas leak in your building. I would hate for anything tragic to happen to someone so beautiful and precious." The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the weight of impossible choices and devastating consequences. Andrew looked like he was ready to tear the city apart with his bare hands, but Elise could see the defeat creeping into his eyes. Kane had covered every angle, leaving them no way out that didn't involve unacceptable risks and unbearable losses. "I need time to think," Elise said finally, her voice barely audible. "Of course, my dear," Kane replied graciously, like a gentleman granting a reasonable request. "You have until 6 o'clock this evening to decide. If I don't hear from you by then, I'll assume you've chosen the difficult path, and I'll begin implementing the less pleasant alternatives. I do hope you'll choose wisely." After Kane disconnected, Andrew and Elise sat in stunned silence for several minutes, both trying to process the magnitude of the trap that had just closed around them. The morning's lovemaking felt like a lifetime ago, their happiness shattered by the reality of Kane's power and ruthlessness. Finally, Andrew spoke, his voice hollow with defeat and barely contained rage. "We could run," he said without conviction, knowing even as he spoke that escape was impossible. "Leave the city, start over somewhere else, disappear completely." Elise shook her head slowly, tears streaming down her face. "He'd find us eventually. Men like Kane have resources we can't even imagine. And even if we escaped, we'd spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, waiting for him to catch up with us." Andrew pulled her into his arms, holding her, so tightly it almost hurt, as if he could somehow absorb her pain and fear into himself. "I won't let him touch you," he said fiercely, his voice breaking with emotion. "I'd rather die than let that bastard lay a finger on you. I'd rather lose everything than watch him violate what's mine. And I'd rather die than watch your life be destroyed because of me," Elise replied, her voice breaking with the weight of their impossible situation. "Andrew, maybe this is the only way. Maybe I have to do this to save us both from something even worse." "No," Andrew said immediately, his arms tightening around her desperately. "There has to be another option. There has to be—" "What?" Elise pulled back to look at him, her amber eyes bright with tears and terrible resolve. "What other option is there? Let Kane destroy your career and reputation. Risk him having me killed in some staged accident. Watch Derek continue to poison our lives forever. Andrew cupped her face in his hands, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. I can't lose you to him, not even for a weekend. The thought of his hands on your body, of him using you, it's literally killing me. I feel like my heart is being ripped out of my chest. It's killing me too, Elise whispered, her hands covering his on her face. But if it means we can have forever afterward, if it means Derek is out of our lives and Kane has no more power over us, if it means you're safe and your career is protected. You're actually considering this, Andrew said, his voice filled with anguish and disbelief. Elise closed her eyes, feeling like she was being torn apart from the inside. Every fiber of her being rebelled against the idea of another man touching her, claiming her, using her body for his pleasure. But the alternative, watching Andrew's life be destroyed, living in constant fear, letting Derek continue to torment them, seemed even worse. I love you, Andrew, she said, opening her eyes to look directly into his. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. That's why I have to consider it. Because the alternative is losing you completely, and I can't survive that. Andrew kissed her then, desperate and hungry and full of anguish. When they broke apart, both were trembling with the magnitude of their emotions. If you do this, Andrew said, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion, promise me something. Promise me that no matter what he does to you, no matter how he tries to break you or possess you, you'll remember that you belong to me. Your heart, your soul, your future, they're all mine. He can have your body for 2 days, but everything that matters, everything that's real, is beyond his reach. I promise, Elise whispered, though the words felt like acid burning her throat. As the afternoon wore on, they held each other in silence, both knowing that their perfect bubble of happiness was about to be shattered by forces beyond their control. Kane had given them an impossible choice between bad and worse, and they were running out of time to make it. At 5:30, with trembling hands and a heart that felt like it was dying in her chest, Elise made the call that would change everything. Mr. Kane, this is Elise Wood. I accept your proposition. Kane's satisfaction was audible through the phone, like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Wonderful, my dear. I knew you were intelligent enough to see reason. I'll send a car for you at 7 o'clock sharp. Pack appropriately. We have several high-profile events to attend, and I want you to look absolutely stunning on my arm. After. She hung up. Andrew pulled her into his arms one last time, both of them trembling with the magnitude of what they'd just agreed to. The future they'd dreamed of together seemed to hang by the thinnest of threads. This doesn't change anything. Between us, Andrew said fiercely, his voice raw with emotion. When you come back to me on Sunday night, we're going to put this behind us and never speak of it again. We're going to get married and have the life we planned, and Kane will just be a bad memory we survived together. Elise nodded, not trusting, her voice to remain steady. In her heart, she prayed that would be possible, but she also knew that some things, once broken, could never be completely repaired. She could only hope that their love was strong enough to survive whatever came next. Chapter 7. Choosing Love. The elegant black limousine that materialized at precisely 7 o'clock embodied everything Elise had anticipated from a man like Vincent Kane. Sleek, luxurious, and psychologically intimidating. She positioned herself at Andrew's penthouse window, observing the vehicle's predatory stillness in the street below, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird frantically seeking escape. Within mere minutes, she would cross that threshold and enter a nightmare that felt surreal, despite its harsh reality. Andrew stood behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders, with a possessive tenderness that made her want to weep. They had spent the last hour making love with a desperate intensity that spoke of goodbye, their bodies communicating what words couldn't capture. Even now, she could feel the lingering heat of his touch on her skin, the whispered promises and declarations of love that he'd poured into her ear as he moved inside her. "You don't have to do this," Andrew said for the 100th time, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. "We can find another way. We can—" "Andrew, please," Elise interrupted, turning in his arms to face him. "We've been over this. There is no other way. Kane has us trapped, and the only way out is through." She wore an elegant black cocktail dress that clung to her curves like a second skin, her makeup flawless despite the tears she'd shed throughout the day. Kane had sent specific instructions about her appearance. She was to look like a woman, worthy of being seen on his arm at the city's most exclusive social events. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was dressing up to be paraded around like a trophy before being claimed as a prize. Andrew's hands framed her face, his grey eyes dark with anguish. "I keep thinking this is some kind of nightmare that I'm going to wake up from. The woman I love is about to walk out that door and spend the weekend with another man, and there's nothing I can do to stop it." "You can remember that I love you," Elise whispered, her own tears threatening to fall despite her resolve to stay strong. "You can remember that no matter what happens over the next 2 days, my heart belongs to you completely. Kane can have my body, but he can never touch what really matters." Andrew kissed her then, desperate and hungry, and full of a love so fierce it took her breath away. When they broke apart, both were trembling with the magnitude of their emotions. "When you come back to me," Andrew said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we're going to get married immediately. I don't care about timing or proper engagements or any of that bullshit. I want you as my wife legally, officially, irrevocably." The proposal should have been the happiest moment of Elise's life. Instead, it felt like another knife to her heart, a reminder of everything she was risking by walking out that door. "Yes," she whispered, because what else could she say? "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll be yours in every way that matters." The knock on the door came like a death knell, sharp and insistent. Kane's driver, come to escort her to her fate. Andrew's entire body went rigid, his protective instincts warring with the helpless reality of their situation. But as Elise moved toward the door, something inside her snapped. The sight of Andrew's anguish, the memory of Derek's betrayal, the knowledge that she was about to sacrifice her dignity and self-respect to save the people she loved. It all crystallized into a moment of perfect, blazing clarity. She stopped, with her hand on the doorknob, and turned back to Andrew, her amber eyes burning with sudden determination. "No," she said quietly, and the word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Andrew stared at her, confusion and hope warring in his expression. "Elise!" "No," she repeated, louder this time, her voice gaining strength with each syllable. "I won't do this. I won't prostitute myself to save us from Kane's threats. I won't let Derek's betrayal turn me into something I'm not. And I sure as hell won't let some rich bastard think he can buy me like a piece of property." The knock came again, more insistent this time. Elise ignored it completely, her attention focused entirely on Andrew. "You were right," she said, moving back toward him with determined strides. "Some things are more important than safety, more important than money, more important than convenience. Our love is one of those things. What we have together is sacred, and I won't let Kane defile it." For any reason, Andrew's face transformed with relief and fierce pride. "Are you sure? Because once we refuse, there's no going back. Kane will follow through on his threats." "Then we'll face them together," Elise said simply. "We'll fight the charges, rebuild your career if necessary, deal with Derek's continued harassment, and watch our backs for as long as it takes. But we'll do it with our integrity intact and our love untainted." The knocking had become pounding now, and they could hear muffled voices in the hallway. Kane's driver was growing impatient. Andrew pulled out his phone and dialed Kane's number, his eyes never leaving Elise's face. When the billionaire answered, Andrew's voice was calm and deadly. "Kane, this is Andrew Shadrick. Elise has reconsidered your offer." "Excellent." Kane's smooth voice came through the speaker. "I knew she'd see reason eventually. My driver says she hasn't come down yet, but—" "She's not coming down," Andrew interrupted, his voice like ice. "She's not coming to you tonight, or any night. The deal is off." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Kane finally spoke, his voice had lost all pretense of civility. "I see. How disappointing. I suppose you've both chosen the difficult path, then." "We've chosen love over fear," Elise said, speaking directly into the phone. "We've chosen dignity over safety. And we've chosen to trust that our love is strong enough to survive whatever you throw at us." Kane's laughter was cold and humorless. "How wonderfully naive. You have no idea what you've just done, do you? The forces I can bring to bear, the ways I can destroy your pathetic little lives." "Bring it on," Andrew said quietly, and something in his tone made Kane pause. "But understand this. If you come after Elise, if you harm so much as a hair on her head, I will hunt you down and destroy you. I don't care how much money you have or how much power you think you wield. I will end you." Big words from a man whose career is about to be destroyed. "My career isn't my life," Andrew replied calmly. "Elise is, and I'll protect her with everything I have, everything I am, and everything I can become." After Andrew hung up, they stood in the silence of his penthouse, listening to the sound of the limousine driving away. The immediate danger had passed, but they both knew it was just the calm before the storm. "Well," Elise said with a shaky laugh, "I guess we just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the city." Andrew pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered into her hair. "So fucking proud of your strength, your courage, your refusal to compromise who you are." "I couldn't do it," Elise admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. "When it came down to it, I couldn't betray what we have together. I'd rather face Kane's worst threats than live with the knowledge that I'd sold myself to protect us." "Whatever comes next," Andrew said, pulling back to look at her with eyes blazing with love and determination. "We face it together." Kane thinks money and power make him untouchable, but he's about to learn what happens when he threatens something truly precious. As they kissed again, soft and sweet and full of renewed commitment, both knew their fight was just beginning. But they also knew something Kane couldn't understand, that love, real love, was the most powerful force in the world. And theirs was strong enough to move mountains. Outside, the city sparkled with lights and possibilities. Somewhere in that maze of steel and glass, Vincent Kane was plotting their destruction. But in Andrew's penthouse, surrounded by the warmth of their love and the strength of their commitment, Elise and Andrew began planning their counterattack. The war was on, and they intended to win. Chapter 8. Breaking Down Walls. 3 grueling weeks had elapsed since Elise's defiant rejection of Vincent Kane's proposition, and the billionaire had methodically unleashed devastation upon their lives with ruthless precision. Andrew's prestigious law practice faced federal investigation for fabricated charges of witness tampering and evidence manipulation, all meticulously crafted lies, yet convincing enough to freeze his substantial assets and suspend his professional license pending comprehensive review. The media had seized upon the scandal with ravenous enthusiasm, systematically portraying him as a corrupt attorney who employed illegal tactics to secure victories. Elise's existence hadn't been spared from Kane's vindictive campaign either. Derek had contested their divorce settlement with manufactured evidence of her affair with Andrew during their marriage proceedings, claiming she'd committed adultery and therefore deserved nothing. Tabloid photographers stalked her relentlessly, and her business clients were cancelling contracts with alarming frequency, terrified of being associated with the expanding scandal that seemed to grow more toxic by the day. But the most devastating aspect wasn't the professional destruction or the media circus that had turned their lives into a spectacle. It was watching the man she loved being slowly crushed under the weight of circumstances beyond his control. Andrew had always been a force of nature, confident and commanding in every situation, radiating a power and authority that made lesser men step aside. Now, confined to his penthouse while lawyers fought the charges against him, he'd become a caged lion, all restless energy and barely contained fury, with nowhere to direct his protective instincts. The transformation was heartbreaking to witness. The man who had swept her off her feet with his strength and confidence was now battling an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't touch, couldn't defeat through traditional means. His usually immaculate appearance had given way to rumpled clothes and stubbled cheeks, his steel-grey eyes shadowed with exhaustion and frustration that no amount of sleep could cure. Tonight they sat in his home office surrounded by towers of legal documents, empty coffee cups, and the detritus of their desperate fight to clear his name and reclaim their shattered lives. The room that had once been a symbol of Andrew's success and power now felt like a war room where they were fighting a losing battle against an enemy with unlimited resources. The investigative team found another witness willing to testify that, "I bribed him," Andrew said, his voice hollow with defeat as he stared at the latest legal filing. "Complete fabrication, but he's credible. A former court clerk with a spotless record who suddenly has gambling debts that Kane undoubtedly paid off in exchange for his perjury." Elise looked up from the financial records she'd been reviewing, her heart breaking at the weariness in his voice. The strong, confident man she'd fallen in love with was still there beneath the exhaustion, but she could see how the constant attacks were wearing him down, chipping away at his natural confidence, like water-eroding stone. "We'll prove it's all lies," she said, trying to inject conviction into her voice despite her own growing despair. "We just need more time to gather evidence, to expose Kane's manipulation." "Time we don't have," Andrew interrupted, running his hands through his disheveled hair in a gesture that spoke of bone-deep frustration. "My savings are almost depleted, the legal fees are astronomical, and Kane's adding new charges faster than we can refute the old ones. He's systematically destroying everything I've built, everything I've worked for, and I'm powerless to stop it." The defeat in his voice was like a physical blow to Elise's heart. She could see how the helplessness was eating at him, how being unable to protect her and fight back was destroying him from the inside. This proud, powerful man was being forced to watch his world crumble while the woman he loved suffered alongside him. "Maybe I should have gone to Kane that night," she said quietly, the words tasting like poison in her mouth even as she spoke them. "Maybe if I'd just accepted his proposition, endured whatever he wanted for those 2 days." Andrew was across the room in an instant, gripping her shoulders with enough force to leave marks, his eyes blazing with renewed fire that reminded her of the man who had first captured her heart. "Don't!" he said fiercely, his voice vibrating with emotion. "Don't you dare second-guess the choice we made. What we have together is worth more than my career, more than money, more than anything Kane can take from us. But look what it's cost you," Elise whispered, tears streaming down her face as she reached up to touch his stubbled cheek. "Your practice, your reputation, everything you worked so hard to build, it's all being destroyed because I couldn't sacrifice myself for our future. And look what it's preserved," Andrew said firmly, his hands moving to frame her face with infinite tenderness. "Our love, our integrity, our ability to look at ourselves in the mirror without shame. If I'd let you go to Kane, if I'd let him touch you, use you, violate what's sacred between us, that would have destroyed something that can never be rebuilt or replaced." The possessive intensity in his voice sent heat rushing through Elise despite their dire circumstances. Even in the midst of their darkest hour, Andrew's claim on her was absolute and unwavering. His love a constant source of strength in a world that seemed determined to tear them apart. "I love you," she whispered, the words carrying all the anguish and gratitude and desperate hope in her heart. "I love you so much that sometimes I can't breathe from the intensity of it." Andrew's response was to kiss her with a hunger that bordered on desperation. All the frustration and fear and love he'd been suppressing for weeks pouring out in a single passionate contact. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, their bodies responding to each other despite the chaos surrounding them. "I need you," he said roughly, his hands already working at the buttons of her blouse with trembling fingers. "I need to remember what we're fighting for, need to feel that this nightmare is worth enduring, if it means keeping you in my arms." Their lovemaking was fierce and desperate, a claiming and a confirmation rolled into one. On the leather couch, in his office, surrounded by the evidence of their crumbling world, they lost themselves in each other with an intensity that bordered on savage. Andrew took her with a possessive fury that left marks on her skin, and she met him stroke for stroke, her nails raking down his back as she poured all her love and desperation into their joining. It was raw, primal, and absolutely necessary. A reminder that beneath all the legal battles and media attacks, they were still two people who loved each other with a passion that transcended everything else. Their bodies moved together with perfect synchronization. Each touch a promise, each kiss a vow that they would survive this together. "You're mine," Andrew growled against her throat as he moved within her, his voice rough with possession and need. "No matter what Cain does to us, no matter how many lies he spreads or how much he destroys, you belong to me completely. Always." Elise gasped, her body arching beneath his as he drove her toward the edge of ecstasy. "In every way that matters, for the rest of my life, I'm yours." Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath, both knew something fundamental had shifted between them. The polite veneer of civilization had been stripped away by their ordeal, leaving only the raw, primitive truth of their connection. They had been tested by fire and emerged even more bonded than before. "We can't keep living like this," Elise said quietly, her head resting on Andrew's chest as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "The stress is destroying us both, and Cain is winning by making us live in constant fear." "I know," Andrew replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion, but touched with something new, a spark of his old determination returning. "But I don't know how to stop Cain without more ammunition than we currently possess." "Maybe we're approaching this wrong," Elise said slowly, an idea beginning to form in her mind like dawn breaking over a dark landscape. "Maybe instead of trying to defend against Cain's attacks, we should go on the offensive. Fight fire with fire." Andrew stiffened beneath her, his body coming alert as his strategic mind began to engage. "What do you mean?" Elise sat up, her amber eyes bright with sudden inspiration and renewed hope. "Men like Cain have power because they think they're untouchable, because they believe their wealth and influence put them above the law. But everyone has secrets, everyone has vulnerabilities. What if we found his?" "It's incredibly dangerous," Andrew said immediately, his protective instincts warring with his desire for revenge. "If Cain realizes we're investigating him, if he discovers we're trying to expose his operations, what's he going to do?" Elise laughed bitterly, but there was steel in her voice now. "Destroy us? He's already doing that. Frame you for crimes you didn't commit? Already happening? Ruin my business? Check. At least this way we're fighting back, instead of just taking whatever punishment he decides to dish out." Andrew considered her words, and she could see the predator awakening in his eyes. The ruthless attorney who'd never lost a case because he was willing to do whatever it took to win. The man who had built his reputation on being more cunning, more prepared, and more determined than his opponents. "I do know someone," he said slowly, his voice taking on the calculating tone she remembered from their early meetings. "Marcus Rivera. He used to work for Kane's organization before he got out. If anyone knows where the bodies are buried, it would be him. He might be willing to talk if we approach him carefully." Hope flared in Elise's chest for the first time in weeks, bright and warm and intoxicating. "Then let's do it. Let's stop playing defense and start playing offense. Let's remind Kane why it's dangerous to threaten people who have nothing left to lose." The next evening, they met Marcus Rivera in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where conversations weren't overheard and questions weren't asked. He was a small, nervous man with the haunted eyes of someone who'd seen too much and escaped to tell about it. When Andrew explained what they needed, Marcus actually laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "You want dirt on Vincent Kane? Christ, where do I even start? The man's a walking crime syndicate with better public relations and more expensive lawyers." "We need something that will stick," Andrew said quietly, leaning forward with the intensity that had made him legendary. "In courtrooms, something that will bring him down permanently, not just inconvenience him temporarily." Marcus glanced around nervously before leaning closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There's a human trafficking operation. Young girls from Eastern Europe, brought in for the wealthy elite who have specific tastes. Kane's the money behind it, but he's incredibly careful to keep his hands clean. The only evidence is in a private safe in his estate, along with other insurance policies he keeps on powerful people." "How do we get to it?" Elise asked, her heart pounding with excitement and terror in equal measure. "We don't," Marcus said firmly, shaking his head. "Kane's estate is like a fortress. Armed guards, security systems, the works. The only people who get close to that safe are his most trusted inner circle, and they're all either too loyal or too scared to betray him." As they left the bar that night, Andrew was quiet and thoughtful, his strategic mind working through possibilities and obstacles. Finally, he turned to Elise with an expression that was equal parts admiration and deep concern. "I know what you're thinking," he said, stopping under a streetlight to face her directly, "and the answer is absolutely not." "Andrew?" "No," he said firmly, his hands gripping her shoulders. "I won't let you put yourself in that kind of danger. The idea of you anywhere near Kane, especially after everything he's put us through, is the only way we're going to get close enough to that safe to find the evidence we need," Elise finished, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You heard Marcus. Kane's estate is impenetrable except to his inner circle. But I could get an invitation." "By doing what? Offering yourself to him after we already rejected his proposition?" "By making him think the pressure has broken me," Elise said quietly, the plan crystallizing in her mind with frightening clarity. "By convincing him that weeks of watching you suffer has changed my mind, that I'm willing to reconsider his offer if he'll just make it all stop." Andrew stopped walking and pulled her into his arms right there on the sidewalk, his face a mask of anguish and protective fury. "I can't lose you to him, not even as part of a plan. The thought of you in that house, at his mercy—" "You won't lose me," Elise said fiercely, framing his face with her hands and forcing him to look into her eyes. "Because I'm coming back to you. I'm always coming back to you. But first, we're going to destroy the bastard who thought he could break us. What if something goes wrong? What if he doesn't fall for it, or what if he hurts you? Then you'll come for me," Elise said simply, her absolute faith in him shining in her eyes. "And you'll make him regret the day he was born. But Andrew, this is our chance. Maybe our only chance to turn the tables and take back control of our lives. As they stood there in the lamplight, holding each other against the night and the uncertainty ahead, both knew they were about to embark on the most dangerous gamble of their lives. But they also knew they were stronger together than either of them could ever be alone. The war with Vincent Kane was about to enter its final phase, and this time they intended to be the ones left standing when the smoke cleared. Chapter 9. Derek's Regret and Desperation. The strategy had succeeded with breathtaking perfection. Elise's meticulously orchestrated phone conversation with Vincent Kane, masterfully feigning desperation and defeat, had secured her an invitation to his heavily fortified private estate for what he presumed would be her ultimate capitulation. Instead, while Kane entertained his elite guests at an opulent soiree, she had stealthily infiltrated his private study and photographed the incriminating contents of his personal safe, documents revealing not merely human trafficking operations, but systematic bribery, contracted murders, and corruption extending into the highest echelons of government. Now, 3 months later, Vincent Kane was awaiting trial in federal custody, his empire in ruins and his dirty secrets splashed across every newspaper in the country. Derek, abandoned by his powerful patron, had watched his own schemes crumble as the FBI investigation expanded to include all of Kane's associates and accomplices. But it was the personal cost that had destroyed Derek most completely. Elise stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Andrew's penthouse, now officially their shared home, watching the sun set over the city they had conquered together. At 29, she was more beautiful than ever. Happiness and true love had given her a radiance that made her absolutely luminous. Her natural hair cascaded in soft waves over her shoulders, and the simple white silk dress she wore clung to her curves in a way that never failed to take Andrew's breath away. Andrew's arms slipped around her waist from behind, pulling her back against his solid chest as his lips found the sensitive spot behind her ear that always made her shiver with desire. "Mrs. Shadrick," he murmured against her skin, and she felt the familiar flutter of joy at hearing her new married name. They had wed in a small, intimate ceremony just 2 weeks after Kane's arrest, unable to wait another moment to make their union official. She sighed contentedly, melting into his embrace. "I love it when you call me that. I love everything about you," Andrew replied, his hands roaming over her body with the reverent touch of a man who still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "Your strength, your beauty, your courage, the way you feel in my arms, the way you say my name when I'm inside you." Elise turned in his arms, her amber eyes dark with the desire that always simmered between them. Even after months together, their passion had only grown stronger, fed by the trials they'd survived and the absolute trust they'd built together. "Show me," she whispered, her lips brushing against his. "Show me how much you love me." Before Andrew could respond, the sharp sound of their doorbell cut through the intimate moment. They froze, both knowing that no one should be able to reach their penthouse without being announced by security first. Andrew's expression darkened with protective fury. "Stay here," he ordered, but Elise shook her head. "We face everything together, remember?" When they opened the door, they found Derek standing in the hallway, and the sight of him was shocking. The man who had once been handsome and confident was now a broken shell of his former self. His expensive clothes hung loose on his gaunt frame. His face was hollow and unshaven, and his eyes held the desperate gleam of a man who had lost everything that mattered to him. "How did you get up here?" Andrew demanded, his body tense and ready for confrontation. I bribed the new security guard," Derek admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had to see her. I had to talk to both of you." Elise studied her former husband with a mixture of pity and disgust. This pathetic creature bore no resemblance to the man she had once loved or thought she loved. Kane's arrest had left Derek completely exposed. His debts, his crimes, his utter dependence on others to solve his problems. He was facing multiple charges himself, and the tabloids had destroyed what remained of his reputation. "You have 2 minutes before I call security," Andrew said coldly, but Elise placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Let him speak," she said quietly. "I want to hear what he has to say." Derek's face crumpled with desperate relief. "Elise, please, I know I made mistakes, terrible, unforgivable mistakes, but I still love you. I've always loved you. Everything I did, working with Kane, trying to get you back, it was because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you forever." "You didn't lose me," Elise replied, her voice calm and emotionless. "You threw me away. You chose other women over me. You stole my money to fund your affairs, and then you tried to sell me to Vincent Kane like I was a piece of property. You lost the right to call it love a long time ago." Derek flinched as if she'd slapped him. "I was confused, scared of how successful you were becoming. You were so strong, so perfect, and I felt like I was disappearing next to you. The affairs, they made me feel important, desired, but they meant nothing compared to what we had." "What we had was built on lies," Elise said firmly. "You were cheating on me from the beginning, Derek, from our honeymoon. Don't try to rewrite history now that you've lost everything." Tears streamed down Derek's face as the full weight of his losses hit him. I know I destroyed everything good in my life. But please, Elise, we can start over. I'll do anything. Be anything you want. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for what I did to you." Andrew stepped forward, his patience finally exhausted. "She's married now. You pathetic excuse for a man. She's my wife and she's happy, something you never managed to make her in 5 years of marriage." Derek's gaze shifted to Andrew, and for a moment, pure hatred flashed in his eyes. "You don't deserve her. You're just another rich man who thinks he can buy whatever he wants. At least I loved her first." "You never loved her," Andrew replied with deadly calm. "You possessed her. You used her. You treated her like a convenience. But you never loved her. If you had, you would have cherished her, protected her, made her happiness your priority. Instead, you made her feel worthless and unwanted." "That's not true," Derek protested desperately. "Elise, tell him how good we were together in the beginning. Tell him about our dreams, our plans for the future." "Our dreams?" Elise laughed bitterly. "You mean my dreams that you took credit for, my plans that you sabotaged when they didn't serve your interests. Derek, you spent 5 years systematically destroying my confidence and self-worth. You made me believe I wasn't enough, that I was lucky you stayed with me despite my supposed failures as a wife." Derek dropped to his knees right there in the hallway, his face a mask of desperate anguish. "Please, Elise, I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll change completely. I'll worship the ground you walk on. Just give me another chance." The sight of him groveling should have given Elise some satisfaction, but instead she felt only pity for the broken man who had once held so much power over her emotions. "Derek," she said gently, "even if I weren't married to Andrew, even if I didn't love him more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone, I could never go back to you. You showed me who you really are, and that person is someone I can never trust or respect again." Derek's sobs filled the hallway, harsh and ugly sounds that spoke of complete defeat. "I've lost everything," he whispered. "My business is gone. I'm facing criminal charges. Everyone I know has turned their back on me. You were the only good thing in my life, and I threw you away for meaningless affairs with women who didn't care about me at all." "That was your choice," Elise replied firmly, "and now you have to live with the consequences." Andrew had heard enough. He pulled out his phone and called security, his patience with Derek's pathetic display finally exhausted. Within minutes, security guards were escorting Derek away, his pleas and promises echoing through the hallway until the elevator doors closed. When they were alone again, Andrew pulled Elise into his arms, holding her tightly as she processed the encounter with her former husband. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his hands stroking her hair with infinite tenderness. "I'm perfect," Elise replied, and she meant it completely. Seeing him like that, it just confirmed what I already knew. What we have together is real. Love Andrew. What I had with Derek was just an illusion, a fantasy I created because I didn't know what real love looked like. Andrew cupped her face in his hands, his grey eyes blazing with the depth of his feelings for her. "I'm going to spend every day of the rest of our lives showing you what real love looks like," he promised. "You'll never doubt your worth again. Never question whether you're enough, never feel anything less than completely cherished and adored. I already feel that way," Elise whispered, her heart overflowing with happiness and gratitude. "Every time you look at me, every time you touch me, every time you make love to me, I feel like the most precious thing in your world." "You are," Andrew said simply. "You're everything." As Derek's desperate cries faded into memory, Elise leaned into Andrew's embrace and whispered the words that would seal their perfect evening. "Tonight, I am yours. You can enjoy me however you want." The promise in her voice, the complete surrender and trust it represented, sent fire racing through Andrew's veins. Their battle was over, their enemies defeated, and their love had emerged stronger than ever. Tonight would be a celebration of everything they had fought for and won together. Chapter 10. Complete Victory of Love. Andrew's response to Elise's whispered promise was immediate and overwhelming. He swept her into his powerful arms, carrying her through their penthouse toward the master bedroom as his mouth claimed hers, in a kiss that embodied pure possession, absolute worship, and transcendent love. Witnessing Derek's complete psychological breakdown had only reinforced what Andrew had recognized from their first encounter. She was a goddess walking among mortals, a woman so extraordinary that men would systematically destroy themselves, attempting to possess her divine essence. But she had chosen him, not because he was wealthy or powerful, but because he alone had seen her true worth and loved her for exactly who she was. "My beautiful wife," he murmured against her lips as he set her down beside their massive bed, the one place in the world where they could be completely themselves, completely vulnerable, completely united. "Do you have any idea what those words do to me? The way you surrender yourself so completely, so trustingly?" Elise's amber eyes were dark with desire and love as she began unbuttoning his shirt with fingers that trembled slightly with anticipation. "Show me," she whispered, her voice husky with need. "Show me what it does to you. Show me how much you want me." Andrew caught her hands, stilling them as he looked deep into her eyes. "First, let me tell you what seeing Derek tonight did for me. Watching that pathetic excuse for a man grovel for something he threw away, it made me realize how incredibly lucky I am, how grateful I should be every single day that his stupidity and weakness drove you into my arms." His hands moved to the zipper of her white silk dress, sliding it down with reverent slowness as he continued speaking. "He had 5 years with you, Elise. 5 years of holding this perfect body, of coming home to your smile, of having your love and devotion, and he was too much of a fool to appreciate the treasure he possessed." The dress pooled at her feet, leaving her in delicate lace lingerie that made Andrew's breath catch in his throat. Even after months of marriage, the sight of her still hit him like a physical blow. The elegant curve of her neck, the perfect swell of her breasts, the soft skin that seemed to glow in the lamplight. "But his loss is my gain," Andrew continued, his hands skimming over her body with the reverent touch of a man worshipping at an altar. "Every day he wasted not appreciating you is a day I get to love you properly. Every tear he caused you to shed is a smile I get to put on your lips instead. Elise's hands finished their work on his shirt, pushing it off his shoulders to reveal the powerful chest and arms that made her feel so safe, so protected, so desired. "I used to think I knew what love was," she confessed, her fingertips tracing the lines of his muscles. "But what I felt for Derek was nothing compared to this. Nothing compared to the way my heart races when you look at me, the way my body comes alive when you touch me." Andrew lifted her onto the bed, following her down onto the silk sheets as his mouth found her throat, tasting the sweetness of her skin. "Derek made you doubt yourself," he said between kisses, his voice rough with emotion. "He made you think you weren't enough, weren't worthy of complete devotion. But you are everything, Elise. You are strength and beauty and passion and intelligence all wrapped up in one perfect package." His hands and mouth moved over her body with practiced skill, knowing exactly how to touch her, where to linger, how to make her arch and moan beneath him. But tonight was different. Tonight was about more than passion, more than physical release. Tonight was about celebration, about gratitude, about the absolute triumph of their love over every obstacle that had been thrown in their path. "I love you," Elise gasped, as Andrew's mouth found her most sensitive places, his talented tongue making her see stars. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes. The intensity of it, the completeness of it." "Don't be frightened," Andrew murmured against her heated skin. "This is what real love feels like. This consuming need, this desperate hunger for each other, this feeling that we're two halves of one soul, this is what Derek could never give you because he was too selfish to truly love anyone but himself." When Andrew finally joined there, bodies together, sliding deep inside her with one powerful thrust, they both cried out at the perfection of it. No matter how many times they made love, this moment of connection always felt like coming home, like finding the missing piece of themselves. "You're mine," Andrew growled as he began to move within her, his grey eyes blazing with possessive fire. "Mine to love, mine to protect, mine to worship. No one will ever take you from me. No one will ever hurt you again. No one will ever make you doubt your worth." "Yours," Elise agreed breathlessly, her nails digging into his shoulders as he drove her toward the edge of ecstasy. "Always yours, in every way that matters, for the rest of my life." Their lovemaking was fierce and tender by turns, a physical conversation conducted in gasps and moans and whispered endearments. They took each other to the heights of pleasure again and again, each climax more intense than the last, each joining a reaffirmation of their unbreakable bond. Hours later, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath, both glowing with satisfaction and drowsy contentment, Andrew traced lazy patterns on Elise's bare shoulder as she curled against his side. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, noting the contemplative expression on his face. "The future," Andrew replied, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Our future. I want to give you everything, Elise. Children who will have your beauty and strength, a home filled with laughter and love, adventures around the world, quiet moments like this where it's just us against the universe." Elise lifted her head to look at him, her eyes bright with tears of happiness. "I want all of that too, but mostly I just want you. As long as I have you, everything else is just bonus." "You'll have me forever," Andrew promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Through every triumph and every challenge, through every joy and every sorrow, through every day and every night for the rest of our lives. This is our beginning, Elise, not our ending." As if to seal his promise, he began making love to her again, slow and sweet this time, a gentle claiming that spoke of forever rather than just tonight. Their bodies moved together in perfect harmony, two souls expressing their love in the most fundamental way possible. Outside their penthouse, the city continued its relentless pace, people struggling with their own dramas, their own heartbreaks, their own quests for love and meaning. Somewhere in that urban maze, Derek was probably drinking himself into oblivion, mourning the loss of everything good in his life. Vincent Kane sat in a federal prison cell, his empire of corruption finally brought to justice. But in the sanctuary of their bedroom, surrounded by silk sheets and soft lamplight, Andrew and Elise Shadrick celebrated the complete victory of true love over every force that had tried to destroy it. They had fought for each other, sacrificed for each other, and emerged stronger than ever. As dawn approached and they finally succumbed to exhausted sleep, still wrapped in each other's arms, both knew with absolute certainty that they had found something rare and precious, a love so powerful it could survive any storm, overcome any obstacle, and last for all eternity. Their battle was over. Their enemies were defeated. And their love story was just beginning. In the growing light of a new day, they slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. And together, they were invincible.